In today's video, I'll be ranking every card and tower troop in Clash Royale for the month of June, now that we have the evolved Inferno Dragon in the game, as well as the recent balance changes. The meta has shaken up quite a bit. As always, S tier is the highest rank a card can receive. It means it's very versatile, and there's a good chance it could use a nerf. A tier means the card is well above average. B tier is the upper end of average. C tier is the lower end of average. D tier means the card is below average by a good bit. And then F tier means the card is not that versatile at all, and maybe there's a good chance it could use a buff. Starting off, we got these skeletons, which I'm going to be putting in S tier. By the way, these are the regular skeletons. All the evolutions, I'll be briefly showing you guys my ranking for those at the end. But the standard version, definitely an S tier. A lot of people started using the regular version again instead of the evolved version ever since the evolution was made 4-3. Now a lot of cycle players use the regular version and other evolutions in their deck, which is why the regular skeleton is so solid inside of hog decks, royal hogs, and even heavier decks like the Royal Giant. Just such a versatile card. You can use it in so many different decks, allowing you to cycle so quickly. Bomber going to be going in A tier. A very solid, cheap card. Going to be very good inside of Goblin Drill decks, especially things like E-Giant and also Lava Hound. So it's going to be good in some cheap decks and also some expensive decks. The regular version of the card, definitely very valuable for only 2 elixir. The Goblins are going to be going inside of B tier. They're pretty good, don't get me wrong. But the problem is things like the Guards and the Goblin Gang just going to be significantly better, which is why there's not really any deck that's a requirement to have Goblins in it. So you pretty much just see them from time to time. Maybe with the Goblin Drill, if you really want to, you could use them with the Hog Rider. But things like Skeletons, Goblin Gang, Guards, just going to be better options. So that's simply why I have them inside of B tier. Spear Goblin's going to be going in A tier. Very solid card for getting chip damage. Of course, going to be very good inside of Mortar decks. Also Mega Knight bait spam decks and some log bait decks, minor wall breaker decks. So a lot of cheap things they're going to be very good in for defense, solid, but then they're more known, of course, for the chip damage on offense. Zap going to be going in D tier. The regular version, definitely pretty trash. The Evo is where it's at. That's what everyone's running when people have Zap. They think of the evolved version. But the regular version, you can't really make it work. I mean, you could try to fit it inside of a Giant deck or a Lava Hound deck if you really want to, but there's just going to be a lot of other spells that are going to get significantly more value. The regular Knight Guy's going to be going inside of S tier. My goodness, man. I'm not even talking about the evolved version, just the standard version is so valuable, which is why there's so many people that use the regular Knight and they want to maybe run another evolution inside of their deck because the regular version alone, so much health for the amount of elixir. He is only 3 elixir and he does a solid amount of damage as well. Just fits in so many different decks, whether it's Expo, Hog, Mortar, and then even heavier decks like Graveyard. He's just so reliable, and I even think he's better than the Valkyrie, which is another really popular support card, of course. I just think he really gets the job done, and he's so consistent. Regular Archer is going to be going in D tier. Honestly, a really cool idea could be buffing the regular Archers and nerfing the evolved ones slightly, because I just think the standard ones, kind of like the Zap, are just really bad, and no one's really running them if it weren't for their evolution. But you do have to play the standard ones to get to that Evo, and the regular ones can get some value from time to time, but with how prevalent the arrows are in the meta, they often do get arrowed away before they get too much value. The minions are going to be going in C tier. You can make them work inside of maybe a Giant Graveyard deck if you really want to. Lava doesn't typically play them too much nowadays. Usually other support cards are used, and Sparky's also not super great in the meta, so they're not awful, but they're not great at the same time, especially because of arrows, which are going S tier. Even though, guys, the radius of arrows was reduced, it's still proven to be such a consistent and valuable spell in the meta. You can, of course, make it work inside of Mortar decks, Lava Hound decks, inside of Giant Graveyard, inside of Recruit decks, just spammy decks. It can fit well in a lot of different things. They're also going to be great against the evolved Archers, which are such a nuisance in this meta if you do not have the arrows. So I think the arrows alone kind of help keep the evolved Archers in check, as well as the evolved Firecracker and other just annoying things that people would have a challenge playing against if they didn't have the arrows. Cannon's going to be going in A tier. I think the regular cannon, super solid. In fact, there's even some people using the regular cannon and they don't even have the evolved version in their deck. They have a couple other evolutions, especially in bait. This is where you commonly see this because maybe someone wants the evolved gun barrel and the evolved Valkyrie, so they just have the regular cannon, which of course gets the job done in a lot of scenarios, which is why I definitely think it is for sure one of the best buildings in this current meta. Very good in bait, inside of Hog, Royal Hogs, and even sometimes in heavier decks like E-Giant, you might see it. Very solid. Tesla going to be going in B tier. Main reason for this, most people running the Tesla, they do tend to run the evolved version, which just gets significantly more value. But the regular version not going to be completely dead. Of course, some people do have the regular version, maybe inside of things like Hog or Goblin Drill, but typically in Expo you are always seeing that evolved version, and it really just depends on the deck. But I think it's okay, but definitely not one of the best buildings in the game. The Mortar is going to be going in C tier. I think that it's fallen off quite a lot. I think that there's just a lot of good tools in this meta, good tanks and Earthquake, other spells that just ensure the regular Mortar has a very difficult time getting a connection on top of the tower. Really, pretty much everyone playing this card is using the evolved version. The standard version is just so easy to counter, and even the evolved version isn't in the best spot currently, so I think C tier is a good spot for the Mortar. Might be surprising, guys, but I'm actually going to be putting the Barbarians in F tier. Literally no one plays this card anymore. I think it actually could use a buff. Everyone running this card uses the evolution. There's pretty much not a single soul running the regular Barbarians. Even Lava Hound decks run the Evo Bomber, Evo Valkyrie, Evo Inferno Drag, other evolutions, and then every single deck that has them, Bridge Spam, has the Evo version. Regular version, just not getting any value. The Minion Horde going in D tier, I think it's only slightly better than the regular Barbarians. Only time you really see the Minion Horde is going to be in some like bait spam decks that are kind of off meta. A Mortar, you could maybe make it work, but it is pretty bad as well, especially with how good the arrows are. The Tombstone is going to be going in C tier. I think it's kind of on the level of Mortar. The problem is there's not really any deck that's a requirement anymore. A lot of graveyard decks actually use the Cannon nowadays, or even the Evo Gob Cage. They don't run the Tombstone anymore. And then a lot of Lava Hound decks use the Evo Cage as well, or they're just running a variation that doesn't even have a building. Maybe they got like a Miner instead, or a Lava Loon deck with the Valkyrie and no building. So Tombstone is just becoming less of a requirement inside of decks. The Musketeer going to be going in B tier. I think ever since the Musketeer got that small buff, it has definitely helped her out a little bit. Of course, the Evolved Musketeer is what most people prefer to play, but inside of things like 2.6, Loon Cycle, and even some things like Giant Graveyard, she's proven to be pretty valuable, so I would say B tier is a good spot for her. I'm also going to put the Valkyrie inside of B tier. The evolved version, way better than the regular Valkyrie, but I think that the regular Valkyrie definitely can get some solid value in a lot of scenarios before that evolution is played, especially because we're kind of in a baity meta right now, a lot of Goblin Barrel, and this is actually where the Valkyrie is going to shine over the Knight. You can go in for a Valkyrie to fully counter a Goblin Barrel and other swarms that the Knight wouldn't do as good of a job against, so in some situations the Valkyrie can be better than the Knight, but I think overall the regular Knight definitely better than the regular Valkyrie because it's one less elixir and you can play him more frequently. Hog Rider is going to be going inside of A tier. He always is one of the best win conditions, it seems like, no matter what the meta is. This meta in particular, Hog EQ with the Mighty Miner, very solid combination, especially with the Evo Cannon. And then, of course, Hog X NATO, 2.6, always going to be viable options as well for good players that know how to use them. And if you don't have good tools in your deck, it can be really difficult to stop the Hog Rider, of course, as you guys know. Mini Pack are going to be going in C tier. It's really hard to make him fit inside of decks. Pretty much the only thing you can use him with is the Goblin Giant currently, and the Goblin Giant itself not really in the best spot, even its evolution. So not a great spot for the Mini P.E.K.K.A, but it's not a bad card at the same time, just hard to make it fit inside of decks. Fireball definitely going to be an S tier. When the Lightning got nerfed in the last set of balance changes, in my opinion, that's an indirect buff to the Fireball, because you're never going to have the Fireball as well as the Lightning in your deck. So now that the Lightning is dealing less damage to towers, a lot of people have Fireball as their medium or big spell of choice, which is why you're seeing it all the time inside of things like Expo, and now Royal Giant is always pretty much having the Fireball over the Lightning. And of course, because the Evolved Witch got nerfed in the last set of balance changes, even though she's still pretty broken, she's not as broken, so there's more people using the Fireball as a result of that. And then, of course, inside of things like Giant, Lava Hound, it's going to be commonly seen as well. And then stuff like 2.6 for those of you that still play that. Bomb Tower going to be going inside of B tier, kind of on the level of the Tesla. I would actually say it's probably a little better than the Tesla. Not going to be ordering everything in the tiers, but just want to emphasize, I definitely do think it's better than the Tesla, because inside of minor wall breakers, Loon Cycle, definitely going to be very, very solid. And it's nice to have that splash, especially if you're against something like a Goblin Drill or Royal Hogs. It can really come in clutch to get that splash damage that you're getting, but I don't think it's as viable or used in as many decks as the Cannon or the Goblin Hut, which is also why the Goblin Hut is going to be going inside of A tier. Even though the Goblin Hut did get a nerf in the last set of balance changes where it got a bit of a health nerf, it is still proven to be an outstanding building, definitely one of the best in the game. Very, very good inside of minor wall breakers, in Graveyard especially. Those are definitely the two decks where it shines. In Graveyard, it just has such good synergy. Those Spear Goblins spawning that allows you to have a more threatening counter push with your Graveyard support cards like the Evo Witch or the Knight or whatever you got in your deck. So definitely a very annoying card for your opponent to deal with, especially if you don't have something like a Poison or an Earthquake to help you deal with it. The Giant's going to be going inside of A tier as well. There's a new Giant deck that's been running rampant recently with the Evo Inferno Dragon. Then there's also some other variations without it that just have like the Boss Bandit, the Goblin Machine, the Gob Curse, just giant spam decks in general. A very, very solid win condition at the moment, and then stacking OP support cards behind it, and he's kind of just tanking for everything. He's definitely one of the best win conditions currently in this meta. Regular Wizard going in F tier. Let's face it, pretty much everyone running it, especially high up on ladder, they're playing it to get to the evolution, of course. That Regular Wizard is really, really bad, which is why pretty much no one is running it except for the people using that evolution. Inferno Tower going to be going in B tier. A lot of people running it inside of Log Bait in this meta because there's a lot of beatdown decks like the Giant, of course, even though there's not as much Lava Hound in this meta. Just for the Giant alone, tends to be a very, very good tank killer, and it just pairs very well inside of Bait as well. Also going to be fairly good against the Balloon, which a good amount of people are running, just compared to the Cannon, which of course doesn't attack air. So it's very matchup dependent, but against heavier things, it's going to be very beneficial to have sometimes when you're running Bait or a Goblin Drill deck. Rocket's going to be going in A tier. It's not just Log Bait that it's very good in. Also going to be very good when paired with the Goblin Drill. A lot of Expo players actually have been running it, and minor control players. Ever since that Little Prince got buffed, there's been more people running that Little Prince minor control deck with the Rocket, because that Rocket in Triple Elixir can be so deadly, that Rocket cycle, because it's pretty easy for you to get 2 or 3 Rockets on the map when it's Triple Elixir and be able to close out the game that way. Elixir Collector going to be going inside of C tier. It's made a little bit of a comeback recently because there's that Bridge Spam Elixir Collector deck that is pretty solid, and Pumpo you see occasionally as well, which is pretty decent. Not much Golem, which is why it's not going to be higher than that, like B, or certainly not A tier, because Golem and also like E-Giant with the pump, pretty much completely unviable. Same with Three Musketeers. Barbput, as well as Mirror, of course, going in F tier. As always, sorry, Ult. I gotta give a shout out to Ult. I'm sorry, Ult. I know Ult's gonna be disappointed to see that Barbput in F again, but I had to do it. Unless you're Ult, you just ain't making it work. It's just the stats don't support it very much. It's struggling currently at the top of ladder and in competitive. Same with the Mirror. So Ult's got to continue to represent it because it's still not where it's at, sadly. The Rage is going to be going inside of A tier, even though it got that nerf where it's dealing less damage. Still going to be very solid inside of decks, especially with the Giant, the Elixir Golem, just Gob Giant, spammy decks. It's just pretty solid in a lot of different beatdown decks. It's not really good in Cycle, but in a lot of heavy spammy decks, It's just really, really good and I really do think it's a spell that kind of tends to make those types of decks work and be extra obnoxious. So I do think it is deserving of A tier, even after the nerf it got. Because before the nerf, I think it was an S tier, and now it's around A tier. Skarmory's going to be going in F tier. I think it's been so bad for the longest time. Like, even additions of other cards, like the Goblin Curse, has just made it worse and worse. I think it could definitely use a small buffer in evolution. It's just really, really bad. No deck you have to use it in. It's not really a requirement or anything. This might be interesting to a lot of you guys, but the regular Goblin Barrel is going to be going in C tier. So I genuinely think, as good as bait is at the moment, the biggest issue with it is the evolution. There's pretty much no one running the regular Goblin Barrel. Everyone using this card at the top of ladder is running the evolution because the evolution is what's so good about it. The fact you're getting 2 barrels, it's so overwhelming for your opponent in double and triple elixir when you have so much stuff down. The regular barrel is actually not that threatening, especially with the amount of people running arrows and log. So easy to deal with one lane. On top of the Dagger Duchess being somewhat viable at the top of ladder. So I would actually say it's C tier. It's honestly, the Goblin Barrel itself without the Evo is kind of an average win condition, believe it or not. The Baby Dragon is going to be going inside of B tier. The buff definitely helped it out a decent bit. You see it again inside of Graveyard and other heavier decks, like maybe with the E-Giant, and then the rare times you do see the Golem. Definitely has made a bit of a return ever since they increased the splash radius. But with that being said, definitely not super OP. There's definitely better flying cards than the Baby Dragon, but it has definitely made a bit of a return recently. The Freeze is going to be going inside of C tier. Pretty much, it's mostly only going to be good inside of Graveyard Freeze, but I do think Graveyard Freeze is in a pretty healthy spot at the moment meta-wise that I would say I'd justify putting it in C tier because it pairs so well with like the Evo Executioner as well as the Evolved Inferno Drag. I think the Evolved Inferno Drag definitely helped the Freeze a tad, and then of course you can use it with the Balloon, which you do occasionally see, very rarely. I'm going to put the Witch in D tier. I think that D tier is a pretty fair spot for it because I do think she's slightly better than the Wizard. I think that she just tends to have better synergy with decks compared to the Wizard, which is also partly what has proved why the Witch, like her evolution, has been as dominant as she's been, because she just fits well in a variety of different decks, even after the nerf that happened. And she also, even just the standard version, is pretty good against a lot of the oppressive cards in this meta. For example, like the Boss Bandit, and I think the Witch alone has helped reduce the amount of Prince which we're at right now. And this is actually why I think the Prince is in B tier. It's for 2 reasons. It's because of all the evolved Witch, and even just the regular Witch, which is such a solid counter to the Prince, as well as the Boss Bandit and things like the Guards. That's right, guys. So even though the Prince just a few months ago was incredibly broken, I honestly think he's only B tier at the moment because you see him, of course, occasionally inside a Giant, but there's a lot of people that are actually running Giant without the Prince, and they're using just like the Boss Bandit and the Goblin Machine, and it's because of all the guards in this meta, and Goblin Gang, and the Witch. The Prince definitely got more balance just because of the meta shift. And this might be surprising, guys, but the Balloon is actually in B tier in this current meta. In this meta, because of all the people running things like the Goblin Hut, as well as the increase in the amount of people running the Inferno, and also because Lava is not in the best spot in this current meta because of the Evolved Inferno Drag and just the Evo Witch and things countering it, there's been less Balloon. There's not a lot of people running Lava Loon currently in this meta. That might shift end of the season, but at the moment, the main people running Balloon are using Loon Cycle, which is why I think it is only B tier at the moment, which is one of the first times I put the Balloon in B tier. I almost always put it in A tier. Giant Skeleton's going to be going inside a D tier. He's just kind of an awkward card to use. Not really any deck you can fit him in. I don't even think he's an awful card. It's just so hard to make synergy with him. That's the problem. Lightning going to be going in A tier. After that nerf it got in the last set of balance changes where it's dealing less damage to towers, definitely a very noticeable nerf in my opinion, which is why I definitely think the arrows as well as the fireball, much better spells currently in this meta. But with that being said, the Lightning still definitely going to be played a decent bit, especially inside of heavier decks. So you are going to see it a lot with things like the E-Giant and then the Golem when that is used. Giant you could also use with the Lightning. And then some RG players are using the Lightning still, but a lot of them are tending to run the Fireball now, which is why I do think the Lightning has dropped to A tier. The Expo is going to be going inside of B tier. It's in a very solid spot in this current meta, which is why it finished number 1 last season. I mean, the Expo, Evo Archers, Evo Tesla, just all in a really good spot, which has just helped the win condition as a whole. And I think they gave it like a secret buff or something like that as well. I could be wrong, but I think they were like fixing a bug and then they ended up giving it like a very small damage buff or something like that. I could be wrong, but that's what I heard anyway, which has also helped the card a little bit. The P.E.K.K.A is going to be going in D tier ever since they decreased her range. The standard version has been really, really bad, and it's pretty much a requirement to run the evolution now. The Golem is... I was debating whether I wanted to put this in C tier because I did see there were like 3-4 people in the top 200 with it, but I'm going to put it in D because I think that... Well, I don't know. I don't think that's a ton. And I just think the Golem is just in a very bad spot still. And it's just a card that has continued to be weak for a while. But it is kind of borderline C. I'm going to put it at the very top of D because I noticed this season in particular, it seemed to be slightly better than the last. But I don't know if it's quite enough to put it on C tier. This might be kind of a controversial one, but I'm going to put the Royal Giant in C tier because every single person running the Royal Giant is using the Evolve version. I'm gonna do B. You know what? I feel like the Evo RG is just too good to not put the regular version in at least B. And the regular version, let's face it, it's definitely not that bad, but I just really want to emphasize how much better the Evolve version is because I really think the regular RG is just, especially against ground decks, it's really not as great when you're not getting that knockback, especially with all the things like Monk in this meta and like Guards, Knight, Goblin Gang. Like when the Evo RG is able to knock those units back, it's just so beneficial and makes it so much easier for you to break through and get connections on top of the tower compared to the regular version. But the regular version definitely not that bad, and it can have success and break through many, many times, of course. The Three Musketeers are going to be going inside of F tier. They have just proven to be very bad still, even after the buff that the Musketeer got. It's just really hard to make them work, especially because the pump isn't in an outstanding spot. And I really feel like the pump needs to be like A tier for the Three Musketeers to actually be good. The Dark Prince is going to be going in C tier. Pretty much you can only use it inside of off-meta decks, like with the Goblin Giant. It's kind of the same case as the mini P.E.K.K.A. I mean, it really can only fit in one thing with Goblin Giant and Sparky, and both of those cards are not in a great spot. Currently, the Poison is going to be going in A tier. I definitely think it's a bit weaker than the Fireball. Don't get me wrong, like, it's pretty close, but I feel like the Fireball is just a bit more versatile. And the Poison, I mostly see it inside of Graveyard. That's the main deck I see it in, where it's almost always used, especially Splash Shard. But you can also use it with things like the Goblin Drill and the Miner, but a lot of those decks, especially Miner, tends to have the Rocket nowadays over the Poison, which is why I don't think the Poison's as versatile as it used to be. When I think of Poison, I definitely think of the Graveyard most of the time. The Princess is going to be going inside of A tier, especially with how good of a spot Bait is in this current meta. I just think Bait goes hand in hand with the Princess. She, of course, is used inside of Bait decks way more often than the Dark Goblin, and just as a win condition, too, that makes her, I think, really strong. The fact you can play her at the bridge and get chip damage, definitely, I would say, deserving of A tier. The Ice Wizard is going to be going inside of A tier as well, because ever since he got that splash radius increase, it has helped the card a ton. So the decks he was already used in, he's even better in, like inside of Splash Shard, of course, or Ice Bow. But then you, of course, see him in some decks that don't even have the Tornado sometimes, like maybe Mortar decks, for example, or I forget the other deck I was thinking of. I just lost my train of thought. But Mortar especially, but then also sometimes I think like even some bridge spam decks you could see him. But definitely, yeah, really solid. You don't even have to use him with the Tornado anymore, which is the point. I was trying to make. The Fire Spirit is going to be going inside of B tier. I've noticed it's a very, very solid card, especially with the Goblin Drill. The Goblin Drill, it's absolutely outstanding with. And then sometimes with things like Royal Hogs or Expo, especially Pumpo, you'll commonly see the Fire Spirit. It's kind of difficult to run it inside of heavier decks, but some cycle decks you can definitely make it work in, and it can get a lot of value. The Furnace, though, on the other hand, going inside of F tier, just can't really fit it inside of any deck. It's way too vulnerable to spells, and it's just not really that great. Even though the Fire Spirit recently got buffed, it didn't really help the card out that much, unfortunately. The guards are going to be going in A tier. I think they're so close to S tier, but I just think things like the Goblin Gang and the Skeletons are just slightly better than the guards at the moment. But the guards are going to be absolutely outstanding inside of things like Mortar. Lava Hound decks use them too, so heavier things. Bait sometimes likes running the guards. Things, minor decks, even Giant. Sometimes you'll see Giant with the guards as kind of the defensive card. So a lot of different decks you can run them in. They don't die to arrows, which is really cool as well. The Miner is going to be going inside of S tier. I feel like this card is almost always S tier no matter what the meta is, because of course there's those Miner decks with the the Rocket you'll see often, or maybe Miner Poison. But then you compare the Miner with things like the Giant. I've seen some people recently using Giant Miner again. And of course with the Balloon Cycle, it's just so popular. And there's just so many different ways you can use the Miner. I mean, even on defense, you can sometimes use him when you're in a bit of a pinch or whatever, and you don't have like another tank in cycle. Like, you can just go in for a defensive Miner, and it has a lot of health. So a lot of uses of the Miner. It's just a very versatile card all around. The Sparky's going to be going in D tier, just with all the Rocket in the meta and even the Lightning still after the nerf it got. Probably not a really big surprise, especially with all the bait too. It's just really hard to beat bait with Sparky, so it's just hard to get value out of it in the meta, whether it's with the Gob Giant or the Giant. Lost my train of thought for a second. Lava Hound, surprisingly, guys, is going to be going in C tier. This is one of the worst metas in a while I've seen for the Lava Hound. I typically have the Lava Hound in A or at least B tier, but I genuinely think it's kind of an average or even a slightly below average win condition at the moment, because there's just so many good counters to it, like with Expo being better in this current meta, and then there's just a lot of like good counters to the Lava, like the Evolved Witch, for example. The Goblin Hut 2 is also really, really annoying for Lava Hound players to deal with, as well as the Evolved Inferno Dragon, the Evolved Executioner. Like, these other evolutions that have been coming to the game have just been, making it more and more difficult for Lava Hound to have a good place in the meta, as well as the Evolved Hunter. I kind of forgot about that. The Ice Spirit going to be going in S tier. I think it's the best spirit in the game without a doubt. And actually, ever since they nerfed the Evolved Ice Spirit, it's kind of indirectly buffed to the regular Ice Spirit, which is pretty funny, because now a lot of people are running the regular Ice Spirit, and they have two other evolutions in their deck. Like, maybe now they have the Evolved Knight, for example, and the Evolved Mortar, or maybe they have the Evolved Tesla or something, and the Evolved Valkyrie. You get the point. So now people are like mix and matching other evolutions. Just that freeze aspect of it, and it being only one elixir, allows you to get so much value in so many situations in a ton of different cycle decks, as you guys know. The Bowler is going to be going in B tier. I feel like it's in an okay spot in this meta. Of course, inside a Graveyard Freeze going to be solid. That rare sighting of Lumberloon Freeze, even though it's completely off meta. I know a lot of casuals don't like it, of course. And then inside of E-Giant, occasionally you're going to see it as well. So I think it's in an okay, pretty solid spot in this meta. Log going to be going inside of S tier. It is just such a solid, consistent spell, no matter what the meta is. It's in pretty much every single cycle deck, whether it's Drill, Hog, Miner, Mortar, and then inside of bait, and it helps counter bait, and then inside of heavier things too, like the Royal Giant often has the Log as well. So in so many different decks, and it just seems like no matter how many times they nerf this card, it is always going to be at the top. It is pretty ridiculous, honestly. The Lumberjack is going to be going inside of D tier. I feel like it's pretty much useless without the evolution. I mean, pretty much the only time you'll see this card is in something like Golem. I mean, it may be the rare bridge spam sighting, but regular version, pretty much completely unviable, and even the evolution, not that great ever since they nerfed it. Ice Golem going to be going in C tier. Main deck you're going to see this in is, of course, Loon Cycle. I feel like it's just getting so much value defensively, and then also with the Balloon when you're going in on offense, pairs really nicely with it. And then 2.6, it fits well in. Two, but not too many decks outside of that. Mega Minion going to be going inside of B tier. The main deck it's used in this meta is with the Giant, and because Giant's a really solid win condition in this meta, and the Mega Minion pairs very nicely with it, I would say B tier is a pretty fair ranking, and I would also say it kind of goes hand in hand with the Inferno Drag. Inferno Drag, you might think maybe it's like it should be A tier, but I actually think the regular Inferno Drag is around B tier, and pretty much everyone running the Inferno Drag at the moment is using the evolved version. But I think the standard version, I think a lot of times people in a lot of matchups in this meta, especially where there's like counters to the Inferno Drag, they're kind of just cycling the Inferno Drag to get to that evolution that they know is a lot more threatening. And I definitely don't think it's A tier because there's not a ton of things like Lava Hound in this meta where it's important to have that Inferno Drag as that tank killer, right? The standard version anyway. The Graveyard is going to be going in A tier. I think it's in a very good place in this meta. It's definitely made a bit of a comeback because the last couple tier lists, I'm pretty sure I put it in B tier because of the Goblin Hut. Goblin Hut and the Evo Witch really helped revive Graveyard because it just pairs so well with it. As I spoke about before, the synergy is just amazing. And then, of course, there's also Graveyard Freeze. And then there's even some people still running Goblinstein Graveyard or just like Splash Yard with things like the Evo Cannon, the Evo Cage. So it's not even a requirement with the Gob Hut. So a lot of different Graveyard decks you can play in a very good place in this meta. The Elite Barbarian is going to be going in D tier. They're just horrendous. I mean, very easy to counter. I mean, if you're in mid-ladder, maybe they're a nuisance over level, but they're pretty bad at the top of ladder and in competitive. Tornado going to be going in B tier. Definitely a lot worse after the nerf it ended up getting. But let's be honest, guys. Definitely the nerf did not kill the card. This card is still in a lot of different decks in this meta. Maybe it's not as good anymore for killing units and getting damage, but for those king activations and when you're running something like E-Giant, you need to pull things into the Tornado, just very, very beneficial. Of course, inside a Graveyard, pretty much nothing has changed after the nerf. A lot of Graveyard decks are still running the Tornado, and of course, Icebow has the Tornado, Hog X NATO still has the Tornado, so with a lot of those decks, not much has changed, but the Magic Archer decks with the Tornado, Remieli deck, that has definitely gotten a lot worse, without a doubt. The Clone is going to be going inside of F tier. So many clone counters, you just cannot really make it work anymore. It's just a lot worse. Arrows, poison, NATO, right? It's just getting no value, not really anything you can play it with anymore. The Ewiz is going to be going inside of C tier. It's in an okay spot in this meta, especially with P.E.K.K.A. A lot of P.E.K.K.A. players are running the Ewiz again, but that's about it. It's basically P.E.K.K.A. It's used as a support card. Not much variety outside of that, which is why I can't really place it too much higher. The Goblin Gang is going to be going in S tier. It is in a great spot in this meta because of all the bait. I mean, my goodness, like bait decks typically have the Gob Gang. If they don't have the Gob Gang, it's the guards then, but usually it's the Goblin Gang because you can split it, so it's really good with the Evo Barrel, and it's like you cannot ignore it. It deals so much damage on top of your tower. Then it's used in a couple other things besides just bait. Mortar, it's a great card to have as well. And then recruits, guys. Recruits spam often has the Goblin Gang as well, which can be such a struggle to deal with if you do not have the proper cycle or spell in hand. The Dark Goblin going to be going inside of C tier. This is the regular Dark Goblin. I think is a lot more manageable to deal with compared to the Evolved version, which is actually why most people running the Dark Goblin have the Evolved version. And I just think compared to the Princess, drastic difference. So, I mean, even though I know the Dark Goblin is a pretty annoying card, I just don't think it's... I'm gonna put it in B tier. I talked myself out of it. B tier. I just have to put the Dark Goblin in B tier. The Princess is better, but it's still pretty good B tier. B tier. Yeah, honestly, and I think you guys probably agree. I'd say it's B tier. The Battle Ram is going to be going in D tier. I think it's one of the worst win conditions in the game. I think it's very unreliable because if you're running into a building or a good stun, it can be really hard to get it to connect, which is why almost no one runs it, and everyone running it is using the Evolved version most of the time. Same case with the Executioner. I think the standard Executioner really screws a lot of people over in a lot of different matchups, right? Like maybe if you're against like a Royal Giant deck or like a Hog deck, Royal Hog, something like that, and you're having to use that standard Executioner to defend those pushes, it can sometimes screw you over before you have that Evolved version, which is just absolutely shredding it when you're getting that double damage and the knockback. So I just think the difference between the two is so ridiculous, and before the Evo, not many people were using this card. Bats are going to be going in C tier, kind of a similar scenario for them, but I think they're a little bit more versatile, the regular version, compared to the Executioner, but most people running the Bats are playing them to get to that evolution. They do pair very well, though, with the Miner. Of course, Heal Spirit going to be going in C tier. It's very good inside of that Bridge Spam deck with the Heal Spirit, that one with the Elixir Collector that you guys might have seen recently with the Archer Queen Evo Barbs. Definitely very solid in that deck, but not much else, which is why it's not going to be any higher. The Bandit going to be going in B tier. Reason it's not A tier is because of the Boss Bandit. Boss Bandit has replaced the Bandit in a lot of decks simply because it's just a lot better and they serve, of course, a similar purpose, both those cards. Night Witch going to be going inside a D tier. I feel like it's not really used inside a Giant Graveyard at the moment. The Evo Witch has kind of taken her place, and since Golem is not in a super solid spot, as well as the Elixir Golem, I'd say definitely a fair ranking for the card. Skeleton Barrel going to be going inside a D tier. I feel like it's not in the best spot in this current meta. I think not many people are running it with the recruits anymore. They're using other things instead, like the Royal Hogs again, or even some people are using recruits Hog Rider or the Goblin Barrel. I think a lot of people are just preferring other things over the Skeleton Barrel because just of all the log and arrows in the meta and other things, people have just realized it's getting easier to counter it. It's not really used with mortar much anymore either. Fly Machine going to be going in C tier. It's kind of decent inside of that. There's some off-meta Lava Hound deck it's sometimes used in, or recruits, but a lot of the recruit decks don't use it, which is why I'm not going to put it much higher. And also Fireball's in a solid spot in this meta, which helps kind of keep it in check as well. The Cannon card is also going to be going in C tier. That buff it got in the last set of balance changes, buffing the health by 5%, definitely helped it out after that rework they gave it, which killed the card, brought it up, in my opinion, a tier, because I think last tier list I put it in D tier. It's in C tier. That buff helped it a tad, but again, it's pretty much mostly used inside of Mortar. Hasn't really expanded into a ton of other things, which is why I have it in C. Mega Knight's going to be going in D tier. Pretty much no one runs the regular version of this card high up. Like, everyone running this card is running the evolution for the most part. I mean, that's where it's at. I mean, that's where you're getting that extra strength against beatdown decks and things like the Hog Rider, of course. So I just think the regular version really easy to counter, and not many people are running it. Zappy's going to be going in D tier. They made like a tiny bit of a return in recruits occasionally, which is why they're not in F tier anymore, but they're really not all that. They really aren't doing much pressure-wise, and a lot of the spells are really good against them. The Barb Barrel is going to be going in A tier. I always like to call this card kind of the log of beatdown decks, because that's really what it is. I mean, basically, a lot of the heavier decks that don't have log, they tend to have Barb Barrel, right? So E-Giant, Golem, Graveyard, it's going to be very beneficial to have kind of that mini tank and also that defensive tool where you're getting that Barbarian, which helps you out. So I think for 2 Elixir, it just provides a lot of value, both on offense for the counter push, as well as defense for heavier decks, and I definitely think it's deserving of A tier. The regular Hunter is going to be going in, I would say, C tier. I think after the buff that it got, it's definitely the standard version is a lot better, especially inside of RG. That's actually why I pretty much every single time I see RG now, it's the Evo Hunter, but the regular Hunter's better now. What they buffed the regular Hunter and nerfed the Evo. Like no one's really running the Phoenix anymore inside of RG. So I think I gotta give the Hunter a tier higher, C instead of D after the small buff they gave it. It's definitely a little better now, but not versatile. It's only RG. That's why it's not any higher than that. Ghost is going to be going inside of A tier. I think it's just always seems to be, no matter what the meta is, a little better than the Bandit, because the Ghost is a bit more versatile, right? And I think it's got that uniqueness to it, the invisibility aspect of it, the splash, right? It's just all around a really solid card. Not super broken by all means or anything like that, especially in this meta, but it's just going to be really helpful to have that splash against things like the Goblin Drill. And the difference with the Ghost is you are going to see it inside of things like the Royal Giant, for example, right? So you commonly see the Ghost inside of Bridge Spam decks, like where you would see the Bandit, but the Royal Giant often is paired with the Ghost. If they don't have Monk, then they're going to have Ghost. That's usually the general rule of thumb, so it kind of comes down to preference. Magic Archer is going to be going in C tier. Kind of fell off a little bit ever since the Tornado got nerfed, because that Tornado Magic Archer deck with the Wall Breakers, drastically worse, a lot more difficult to play, because that definitely relied on the damage from the Tornado, especially on defense. So that deck became a lot worse. And with the P.E.K.K.A, you don't see the Magic Archer a ton anymore. Rascal is going to be going in F tier. Not a single deck they're a requirement in. I think the Rascal Boy could get a small buff. They already buffed the girls a decent amount a couple times, I'm pretty sure. Just buff the Rascal Boy. Give him like a damage or a hit points buff of like 5%. I think that would be pretty deserved in my opinion. Snowball going to be going in B tier. Regular Snowball has a surprising amount of usage. As good as the evolved Snowball is, people realize how well it pairs with the Drill and Giant Graveyard especially. Regular Snowball, guys, Loon Cycle, just such a good combination. Like the regular Snowball, because Loon Cycle players use the Evo Musk as well as, I believe, the Evo Skeletons, because that regular Snowball they really like for pushing things away from the balloon instead of pushing it backwards, because if they push it backwards, then it can sometimes retarget the balloon right away after the effect's over, where if it pushes it away, it can be more valuable, the regular version in Loon Cycle decks. The recruits are going to be going in D tier, like, and it's the same, like, I'm going to do this now with the Gob Giant as well as the E-Drag. Like, it's the same, these three things, it's the same thing for all three of these cards. The regular recruits, no one is playing. No one at the top of ladder competitive, no one's playing that card. Completely dead, unviable to use just the regular version without the Evo. Same with the Gob Giant, same with the E-Drag. Like, when you're playing these three standard versions, it's like so often you know you're not getting value out of it, right? Like, you know you're not getting value out of it. You're playing it to get to that evolution, right? So you're like prepping for that, trying to get your cycle right, maybe have your second Evo with the Evo version of the card, and then your other support cards when you get that Evo down, because the standard version is just significantly weaker. It's just, especially with all the buildings in this meta, especially, right, for like the Cannon, the Evo Tesla, things like that, the regular recruits, regular Gob Giant are just not cutting it. You're just not going to be breaking through those buildings. And then same with the regular E-Drag, like just defensively, the difference is ridiculous compared to the evolved version. It's just so much easier to deal with and less threatening. The Royal Hogs are going to be going in B tier. There's a bit less people running the Royal Hog cycle deck, so I don't think they're like A tier anymore after the nerfs that deck got. And then also, recruits doesn't always have the Royal Hogs. Oftentimes it's a bait deck with the recruits, or they might have Wall Breakers or something, or the Hog Rider. So I would say B tier. They're like a fine win condition, but definitely not one of the best. The Ram Rider is going to be going in C tier. She's definitely a lot worse ever since they nerfed the range of the P.E.K.K.A. And also the Mega Knight's not in the best spot. So the main people running the Ram Rider are actually running the variant with the Boss Bandit and the Evolve Executioner Evo Snowball. That's the best deck the Ram Rider is in. In this meta, she's not as good as she was in the last meta of that deck. So I think C tier is pretty fair for the Ram Rider. The Wall Breakers are going to be going in A tier. I think the Wall Breakers are one of the best win conditions in this current meta. Of course, the evolution is a lot stronger than the regular Wall Breakers, but I think the standard version is just so solid because it's just you consistently can get connections from the regular version, and paired with the minor, especially the evolved Royal Recruits and Goblin Drill, you can use them with as well. The Mega Knight, and just a lot of different things you can pair the Wall Breakers with, especially the evolution. But I think the standard version is just a very, very solid card and deserving of A tier. For only 2 elixir, it can pose a really big threat. The Earthquake is going to be going in B tier because of the Hog Rider as well as Royal Hog Cycle. A lot of players do use this card to allow you to break through buildings, especially things like the Cannon and the Goblin Hut, which are so prevalent in the meta. It's a very nice tool to have, but I don't think it's quite on par with things like the Rocket, as well as even the Lightning, even after the nerf it got, because it's just not as reliable for getting damage and value, especially in triple elixir when there tends to be like a lot of units and things on the board. It's nice to have a bit more DPS to kill those units and damage the tower compared to the Earthquake. The Goblin Cage is going to be going inside a D tier. It's kind of the same thing as these other cards. It's like you need to have the Evo. It's just not really getting value without the Evo. The regular version is just so much less threatening, especially defensively. Like, I really feel like the regular cage, no one is really that worried playing into it because it's not going to just like completely annihilate the tank. You can just like easily, deal with the Brawler. The Fisherman is going to be going inside of A tier, especially inside of Royal Giant. It is just absolutely phenomenal. Like, it's just kind of the bread and butter of RG or whatever you want to call it. Like, it's the combo. Like, everyone is running Fisherman with RG. I mean, there's not really many decks outside of RG that run the Fisherman, which is why it's not S tier any longer, because not really anyone's running it with the Gob Giant anymore, and there's not decks like outside of RG running it ever since they gave the Fisherman that small slowdown nerf, but it is just a solid card, man. The E-Golem is going in D tier, the Healer's going in F tier, because E-Golem pretty much never runs the healer anymore, but the E-Golem in this meta is in a really bad spot. It's like very niche. Like, there's occasionally some off-meta E-Golem Gob Machine decks, but that was more last meta. I feel like that's really sizzled down a lot this meta. I've just seen a lot less of it. I think people kind of learned how to counter it. And that's the thing with Eagle, and whenever there's a new variant that emerges, like, people just need to learn how to counter it, I feel like, and then when people learn how to counter it, people realize there's not really many good matchups with it as long as you play properly against it. Firecracker's going to be going in B tier. I feel like she's just in a really solid spot in this meta, especially inside of Hog decks. Like, man, Hog Firecracker, such a great combination, especially paired with the Goblin Hut. I feel like that can be a really nasty combination to play against, but then she also combines really nicely with the Tesla as well, and things like the Inferno Tower, but of course her Evolve version is going to be a lot more annoying to deal with. The Royal Delivery going to be going in B tier. I feel like it's a pretty underrated card, especially inside of not just Royal Hog Cycle, but also Minor Control. The Royal Delivery going to be a very nice tool to have, especially defensively when there's big pushes, especially in double and triple elixir, just going in for that delivery, damaging everything, and then having that recruit, which helps you stall the push. Very nice to have. Skeleton Dragons, guys, are actually going in C tier. They're usually one of the best cards I would say they're usually like A tier, so they're well above average typically, but in this meta, with there not being a lot of Lava Hound, they're quite a lot worse, and also Mortar decks aren't playing them very often, so they're actually kind of like average or below average. Like, they're just kind of the type of card where it's like you could use them in your deck if you want to, but they're not really a requirement at all anymore. E-Spirit going to be going in A tier. I think it's very solid, but slightly worse than the Ice Spirit in this meta. The main two decks, of course, it's going to be very solid in is with the Royal Giant as well as the Expo, but I think the Ice Spirit's just a bit more versatile because you don't have to worry about that King activation, which is why inside of Hog and Royal Hogs, you're going to see it way more than you would see the E-Spirit, as well as Goblin Drill, because the King activation is the biggest downside of the E-Spirit, but without the King activation decks where you don't have to worry about that, like, or take that into consideration, like RG or Expo, it of course is great. The E-Giant going to be going in C tier. It's a little bit better than the Golem, especially because you can use it with things like the Goblin Hut and the Bowler, which pair very nicely with it, but with all the buildings in the meta that I've mentioned in this video, definitely difficult to get it to the tower in a lot of matchups, which is why things like the Giant are going to be a much better beatdown card in this meta. The Mother Witch is going to be going in C tier. She's made a little bit of a return recently, especially inside of bridge spam decks, and then also the occasional times you do see the Gob Giant and Sparky, you often do see the Mother Witch, especially with the return of Graveyard in this meta. She's a very nice tool to have defensively. The Goblin Drill is going to be going inside of B tier. I think it's a solid win condition in this meta, but it's toned down a little bit with the meta shift. I've noticed this month there hasn't been as much Goblin Drill as there was last month. Maybe people just learned how to defend the Goblin Drill Evo Snowball combination, and then also the Gob Hut nerf. I noticed there's not many people running the Goblin Hut with the Drill anymore, which was happening last month. Now, most people running the Gob Hut are running it with usually the Graveyard or the Hog Rider, things like that, but not much Drill I've noticed, so that's made a difference with the card. Onto the champions, I would say the Golden Knight is A tier. I also would say the Archer Queen is A tier, as well as the Mighty Miner and the Monk. Like, honestly, guys, all four of these cards, I've noticed champions are a bit more balanced than they've been recently. I feel like most of them are in a good spot because none of them are really dead, and not too many are OP, except for one in my opinion. But the Golden Knight, definitely pretty close to S tier, but I would say he's A because he's not super versatile. Like with E-Giant, things like that, he's going to be outstanding, or like maybe a bridge spam deck, or I remember last month with Minor Wall Breakers with a Gob Hut, he was good in, but now he's not as good. Inside of Minor Wall Breakers, people are preferring the Mighty Miner, but ever since they gave him that 360 dash, helped the card out a ton, and he's in a really good spot. The Archer Queen inside of Royal Hog Cycle, she's absolutely outstanding. And then in Bridge Spam, of course, with the Pump, that's the other deck you commonly see her in, and then maybe a couple other decks from time to time. You can definitely make her work. The Mighty Miner, amazing inside of Hog Cycle, and also Recruits. That's where he's incredible, just for that, like, DPS. And yeah, Gob Drill decks too, so there's quite a few decks you could fit him in. He's actually one where you could argue he's really close to S tier as well currently in this meta. And then the Monk, he is great, especially inside of Royal Giant, but not just Royal Giant, Bridge Spam. It's really great to have him for that reflection, and he's also just a very, very solid tank. He's got a lot of health. So I feel like all four of these champions are just really good at, just the decks they fit in and doing what they do. Like, all four of them, I really feel like are where champions should be at. The Skeleton King, on the other hand, is going to be going in B tier. I feel like he's just a bit worse than these four champions. You can use him inside of Mortar. That's going to be the main deck where you commonly see a Mortar bait. And the problem is graveyard decks tend to not really run him. You also can run him in Elixir Golem. That's the off-meta deck you sometimes see him in, but I think he's just not quite as good as these four champions. The Little Prince is going to be going inside of C tier. That buff that they gave him was definitely helpful, but it was a very small buff, and there's still not a lot of people using the ability every time, or I notice even most of the time, like, a lot of people are still not using the Guardian, which was the thing that was buffed. So I would say C tier is pretty deserved. I'd definitely say he's the worst champion, but he's no longer in D or F tier. And inside of Minor Control, he's very, very good. That's the main deck you see him in. And then the Gobstein, I'm actually going to put inside of C tier as well. Actually, between these two cards, don't know who is worse, I mean, I would say the Little Prince is actually slightly worse because the Gobstein is still a pretty good tool, especially inside of graveyard decks, but pretty much no one is running the Gobstein anymore in cycles, so it's mostly just exclusive to graveyard. And lastly, guys, the Boss Bandit, in my opinion, is an S tier champion because you can use her in a lot of different decks, especially just, I mean, she's good in cheap decks, right? Like there's that Suspicious Bush bait deck where she's absolutely phenomenal in, that one with the Cannoneer, so she's good in cycle decks, bait decks, but then she's also very good inside of heavier decks as well. A lot of the giant decks now are running the Boss Bandit instead of the Prince just because they've realized how good of a champion she is, and you get that 3-card cycle. She got so much health even after the 3% health nerf she got. She's still very, very good because the thing is they nerfed the guards, right, which helps her out and counteract that nerf, and also the Evo Witch, which was nerfed, which of course is a very good counter to her because the Evo Witch was nerfed alongside of her, that kind of again balances out the nerf. And it's like if they decide to nerf the Evo Witch again and don't nerf her, then she's going to be even better. If they continue nerfing the counters, she just is really difficult to deal with, like all those dashes, and it's really that 3-card cycle and her staying on the map for so long, just abusing that because you can just send her backwards and keep her alive for such a long time, do that ability so then she can dash on top of buildings or units again, just like over and over. So just I would say deserving of S tier without a doubt. But I would say if she gets a very small nerf, the champions otherwise are in a very good spot currently. The Phoenix is going to be going inside of C tier in this current meta. It's just not really used at all because of the fact that every RG player is running the Evo Hunter now, so the Phoenix has just sizzled out a ton out of the meta. Void is going inside of F tier. It is just very, very bad. I mean, the rework or the small buff it got, whatever it got, pretty much accomplished nothing. The Goblin Demolisher is going to be going in C tier. You can use it again inside a Drill, but besides Drill, it's not really seen in many other things, so I can't really place it higher than that. The Gob Curse, guys, surprisingly, is going to be going inside of B tier, as well as the Goblin Machine and the Bush. They've done a really good job balancing these cards recently. The Gob Curse has finally found its place inside of the meta. There's a lot of people using it with the Goblin Machine in that giant deck. The Curse is a common spell scene. Really helps you out against skeleton cards as well as the Evo Witch and helps you defend the graveyard, and people have learned that and really took advantage of that, so it's actually just in a pretty decent spot. You can also use it with bait as well, and then the Gob Machine just pairs very well with things like the Giant, especially right now, and then the Suspicious Bush, very good with that Boss Bandit deck. So that Boss Bandit Suspicious Bush deck alone is the reason why the Suspicious Bush is inside of B tier. People realize it's a solid win condition. Rune Giant going to be going inside of F tier. That buff they gave it, that health buff in the last set of balance changes, pretty much accomplished nothing because it doesn't enhance things permanently anymore. It is still very bad and not really any deck you would want to use it in. The Berserker is going to be going inside of B tier. It's used slightly less than the last meta because in the last meta it was used in Royal Hog Cycle a ton with the God Pup. That deck was nerfed, so it's not as good anymore in that deck, but still in a lot of cycle decks, whether it's maybe with the Hog Rider you want to use it or with the Goblin Drill. Definitely going to be a very great card to have. Kind of underrated in my opinion. Does a lot of DPS for only 2 elixir, that's for sure. And for the Tower Troops guys, and then the Evos I'll do at the end. I already ranked them, and I'm just going to make a couple adjustments and then show you the list for those. The Princess is going to be going inside of S tier. Without a doubt, she's the best Tower Troop in the game. It's not even close. In the top 200, about 60 to 70% of people are running the Princess Tower, which is a drastic lead compared to the other Tower Troops. She's just the most consistent, the Tower Troop that everyone knows the stats for. She's got the most health, and in the vast majority of decks, she's going to be the correct Tower Troop to use, which I think a lot of people prefer as well. I think most people don't want there to be a Tower Troop that is better than the Princess Tower because I feel like that just makes things weird and the game is like just not what we're used to, right? The Cannoneer is going in B tier along with the Dagger Duchess. They're used a lot less compared to the Princess Tower, so much to the extent that I think it's worth putting them 2 tiers lower than the Princess Tower. And both of them are about on par with each other, which is why they're both in B tier. About 10%, 15%. Yeah, I'd say about 15% of people are running the Cannoneer. 15% of people are running the Dagger Duchess inside of the top 200. So they're both pretty much on par with each other. The difference is just the decks that they're used in, right? So the Cannoneer is typically used inside of Mortar decks and Splash Yard. Those are often the two decks you're seeing the Cannoneer used in. And then the Dagger Duchess is oftentimes used inside of spammy decks where you're pressuring a lot, right? So that would be that bridge spam deck with the Elixir Collector, or some log bait players like running the Dagger Duchess, or maybe the Goblin Giant, right? The Evo Gob Giant pairs with the Dagger Duchess decks where you're playing them pretty aggressively and you're trying to get the win inside a single elixir. Whereas the Cannoneer, it's more defensive decks like the Cannoneer and the the Graveyard and the Mortar. And then the Chef, guys, is going to be going in C tier. I actually don't think he's D tier anymore because recently he's proved to be very effective, especially inside of things like the Evo Goblin Giant, Evo P.E.K.K.A, things like that. He also pairs pretty well with the Evo Inferno Drag, just heavier decks in general, maybe even sometimes bridge spam you can use him with. So that's where you're definitely going to notice the Chef being pretty valuable, but compared to the other tower troops, he's definitely more niche, and you have to run him in very specific decks. Alright guys, and here's my evolution tier list. I'm going to, at the end of this video, leave a link to the evolution ranking where I go into detail for all of them. It's pretty similar to what I ranked them a couple weeks ago. The main difference, though, is I was completely wrong about the Evolved Witch. I thought the Evolved Witch was in C or B tier after the nerf, but I was completely wrong. The nerf hardly did anything. She has still remained to be one of the best evolutions in the game. I also underestimated the Evolved Inferno Drag a little bit. I think I had it at B tier, but it has proven to be an absolute menace, especially inside of heavier decks. And I think everything else is around the same within a tier of what I had it before. This is my ranking. Let me know what you guys think. If you guys enjoyed the video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe if you guys are not subscribed already. You can use creator code BOSS to support me in any Supercell game. And thanks again until next time, guys.